Welcome to the Fantasy's Finest Fantasy Football Podcast. Here are your hosts, William Spencer, Jalen McQueen, and Mark Carter.
What's going on, folks? Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Fantasy's Finest Podcast. I know I've been away for a little bit, had a little hiatus, but we're back. It feels good to sit down in the chair once again to be able to talk fantasy football with you guys. So if you are new to the show, my name is William Spencer. I am the host of the Fantasy's Finest Podcast. And today we have a special guest joining us for the show. This gentleman, let me get this right because I want to introduce you right. This gentleman is an expert on all things legal as far as legal aspects of the NFL, closely following major situations that are going on right now as we speak, involving the law, involving NFL players, and providing insights and the latest updates on those situations to help fantasy managers better prepare for their fantasy drafts by helping them navigate the legal aspect of what's going on in the NFL. He's also played fantasy football for nearly 27 years, so the experience is right there for your pleasure. You can also find him on X at Drew Davenport FF, and you can find him on TikTok and Patreon at Fantasy Football Lawyer. You can also check out his podcast, Auction Brief Podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. Mr. Drew Davenport, welcome to the Fantasy's Finest Show. I'm glad to have you on today.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a heck of an introduction. I appreciate you having me. I hope I can live up to that billing.
Yeah, no problem, man. So you got to do it big so you can come back. Got to make you feel welcome. But again, thank you for joining the show.
You bet, man.
Now, we got a show for you today. We have, of course, we have our news and notes where we cover all the latest headlines, newsworthy headlines heading into the new week of fantasy football. Well, actually, training camp is going to begin next week when you hear this show. So next week, training camp begins. All the teams will be showing up for training camp. The rookies have already shown up for training camp as it is. So we have a lot to cover in our news and notes segment. Our main segment is the important headlines heading into training camp. Now, these are headlines where these are important notes to help fantasy managers try and get a grasp on what's been going on, what's been talked about heading into training camp. Players, situations have changed. We know about the draft and free agency making dynamics different. So we're going to go over a couple of headlines that get you guys ready for fantasy football. And of course, I get to pick Mr. Drew Davenport's brain on our Would You Rather segment. Let's get a little grasp on his opinions on a couple of quarterbacks that he would maybe or maybe not pick over another quarterback. So let's get right into the show. And before we get into our main segments, make sure that you're following the Fantasy's Finest podcast on social media at FF's Finest. You can follow us on all your social media platforms like Instagram, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, Facebook. We're also there on Reddit, all over the place. You can also listen to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, you can follow us on our YouTube channel at the Fantasy's Finest Podcast as well. Now, Drew, I wanted to pick your brain just a little bit before we get started, because you've been, like you said, you've been playing fantasy football for 27 years. Now, were you always so in depth with the legal aspect, or was it something that you got into, or is that part of your profession as well?
So the legal stuff really just happened when I started working for Football Guys. That was back in 2019. So I've been a lawyer now for 24 years. And when I was getting a Twitter account back in 2019 just to follow people for fantasy football advice. And really that's the only reason I decided to do it. And then the Tyreek Hill thing was happening. I don't know if you remember that situation where there was an allegation that he had broke his son's arm, and then there was that recording of him talking to his baby mama saying, this is, you should be afraid of me too, and that kind of stuff. It was a horrible recording. And I just remember thinking, there's a lot of people on Twitter missing the important stuff here. They're not getting the right things, that they're not talking about the right things. So I made this thread on Twitter about Tyreek Hill and just said, hey, this is what you should be paying attention to. And it drew the eye of Football Guys co-owner Joe Bryant. He messaged me on Twitter, and everything else is history. I've been doing it ever since.
Wow, that's excellent, because you have definitely been an insight for me since I've been following you on social media, because the people don't pay attention. A lot of people don't pay attention to what's going on in the off season. And then when legal troubles pop up, they don't navigate those areas well. So when you go into the draft, they're thinking, hey, this player should be available. He's here, or maybe his ADP hasn't dropped significantly where it's like a red flag. And then they end up selecting those players without knowing that, hey, this player could be suspended for X amount of games. You should adjust your pick or things like that. So you've definitely been a great insight for me personally since I've been following you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and it really kind of happened organically. I didn't get into the space to become this guy, but then when I started doing it and everybody enjoyed it, I'm like, okay, well, it's tough to break into this business. There are so many people out there who want to give fantasy football advice. I thought, well, if I have a little niche that I can exploit to sort of make a name for myself, I'll do that. And really what it comes from is 24 years of being a lawyer. It's not like I have to do like this extra work to learn how to be this other thing. That just comes naturally because that's what I do for my day job, and so it was an easy crossover for me.
That's excellent. That's excellent. All right, so let's get into the episode. We're going to start off with our news and notes and get right into everything. So let's go. News and notes from around the NFL.
News and notes from around the NFL.
All right, so first up on the docket, if you haven't been paying attention or you've been living under a rock, there have been several issues, legal issues that have popped up over the last few days, beginning with Chiefs wide receiver Rashee Rice. Now, the latest is Rashee Rice has been given a 5-year probation as well as 30 days in prison that he has, or 30 days in jail that he has to exercise within the 5-year probation period. Now, on top of that, Adam Schefter reported that there could be a multi-game suspension looming over from the Dallas judge giving his verdict on the Rashee Rice situation. But in contrast with that, the Washington Post Mark Mask says that those thoughts about a suspension are premature. Drew, what's been your insight on that particular situation with Rashee Rice, his verdict being dropped, seemingly coming out of nowhere, and then the possibility of him getting suspended?
Well, yeah, it did feel like it came out of nowhere, and it's one of those things where I tell people all the time, when I do this job, there are some things that happen that we really can't possibly predict, because sometimes there are things going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. I have been telling everybody that I didn't think Rice would be suspended until 2026, and the reason I thought that was because there was no evidence on the Dallas County website where you would find a case number. There was no evidence that Rice's case had actually been indicted yet. And so my thought was, this case hasn't been indicted yet. They're waiting on something. It'll get indicted here before too long, but then it'll be like the Kamara case, and it'll push out to next off season, and it won't be 2026 until we see a suspension. The one thing I said, though, and I was careful to note this as a caveat to my advice, that was that it's possible there's something going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. And I specifically mentioned it's possible there's a pretrial diversion program that he's being screened for, and we wouldn't know about that. And that turns out that was exactly what was happening. Now, that I didn't hang my hat on that and say, this is what's happening. What I said was, hey, this is possible. My advice is it's not happening till next year, but this is possible. Turns out this is possible was what was really going on. And so he's taking a plea, but what ends up happening is if he does what he's supposed to do throughout this little probationary period that he's got, it sounds like the case will then turn out to be dismissed. He's pled guilty to 2 third-degree felonies, but it sounds to me like he could sort of earn his way out of those felonies by doing a couple things and, of course, spending 30 days in jail as part of the plea deal.
Now, are those diversionary programs, is that something that's normal, or is that something that's new that's been used in this particular case?
No, it's very normal. And I get a lot of people in my comments like, oh, he's an athlete. He'll get off. Nothing will happen. He's an athlete. That's just not true. In fact, sometimes in some jurisdictions, athletes have it harder than regular people because there's so much spotlight on them. So I don't put a whole lot of stock in the whole he's an athlete thing. What what it ends up being is it's sort of something that, like, hey, you've never been in trouble, and if you come out with the right attitude sometimes to the prosecutor, to the police officers, to the judge, and say, hey, I messed up, what can I do here, and you have a good attorney working the case for you, a lot of times they're gonna let you take advantage of these programs. Now, so they didn't specifically create some kind of diversion for Rashee Rice. I'm sure they have some sort of diversion program in that court. Now, I'm a little bit surprised that with that many felony charges, they allowed him to do that. But hey, if that's their policy, that's their policy. I don't know that jurisdiction to know that. But no, diversion programs are extremely common. I handle them all the time in my day-to-day work. So it's a pretty straightforward thing. And, hopefully he takes advantage of it.
Okay. Now, as far as the fantasy football aspect, he's likely to be suspended, or it seems like there's a tug of war there with whether or not Rashee Rice is going to get suspended, and then how long. Do you think that, I mean, with the kind of attention that this case has gotten, it's hard to say that the NFL is just going to turn a blind eye to it, correct?
Yeah, he's going to get some sort of suspension. It was interesting to see the source you pulled about, hey, hold on, I don't know what there's going to be. But my understanding is there's a Chiefs insider that I referenced in a thread I did on Twitter last night about the case. The Chiefs insider says the organization has been of the opinion that he's getting a multi-game suspension, 2 to 4 games territory. So I think there's some sort of insider that knows something's going on there. But also, if you follow the history of these kinds of cases, there's going to be some type of suspension. Dialing that in's a little bit harder because the personal conduct policy has a section where there's a baseline suspension for certain types of things like assault, criminal sexual activity, domestic violence, things like that. That's a 6-game suspension for that type of thing. That doesn't really fit there. And then there's another part that's the substance abuse policy that has suspensions for like alcohol-related offenses, things like that. It doesn't really fit there. So it's like there's a catch-all phrase in the personal conduct policy that says putting others in danger or tarnishing the reputation of the NFL. That's really where it's going to fall under. So it's kind of a catch-all provision. So that makes it hard for us to dial that in because we're using this vague thing for the personal conduct policy. But what I've always said is I don't think it's a 6-game suspension level offense because of the way that he's treated the case. And this is a big thing for me because one of the things I had to learn when I started doing these cases is that the NFL really cares about your attitude. I know that sounds dumb, but it's like if you did something terrible, but you got a great attitude about it afterwards, you get credit for that. The NFL, they care about that. They care about, are you contrite? Do you apologize? Do you own it? Do you try to make things right?
You remorseful.
Okay, yeah, 100%. And that matters to the NFL. And there's always a meeting with the player and Goodell. And if Goodell comes out of that meeting and thinks, hey, this guy really knows he did something wrong, again, that matters. You can lose games off of that suspension just by being a good guy and saying the right things in a meeting with Roger Goodell. So I think Rice is really dialed in on that, and he's going to do a good job with that. So from the beginning, he said, I want to make this right. He's already paid the restitution that was ordered in the case, $115,000. And a side note, the civil case that was pending against him has actually now been settled for $1 million.
Oh, wow.
Attorney fees. So he's actually paying out like $1.2 million already to the victims in this case. I think that matters to the league, and I think that's going to help him avoid a longer suspension. But I still think we're talking 2 to 4 games, and maybe right about 4 sounds good to me.
Yeah, it seems like his ADP is already starting to drop a little bit. He was being drafted around the 2nd round, and now I look at his ADP on fantasy data is down to the wide receiver 16 is about pick 35. So that's somewhere in the 3rd round. Do you think he's going to fall any further than that?
I think it is. I think that these people are slow to react to these kinds of things. A lot of people really want to see that it's actually going to be a certain length before they're going to jump off the bandwagon. So if it comes in at 6 games, people are certainly it's going to dive. But if it comes in at 2, we may not see that big of a depression. So really what it comes down to is people want to see it. So the ADP fall tends to be it lags a little bit behind the news sometimes. So it'll fall. I'm hoping it falls into, wide receiver 20, 22, 24 territory. That'd be wonderful.
Trying to get a steal.
At that point, yeah.
That's good. That's good. All right, moving along. Chargers wide receiver Mike Williams officially retires from the NFL. And it seems like these two things coincide. Trey Harris, their second-round rookie, has signed his 4-year extension or 4-year contract. Now, Mike Williams retires after 8 seasons in the NFL, retires at 30 years old. And remember, he was with the Chargers initially being drafted by them, hit free agency, landed with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and then he came back during for this year's free agency and signed with them. But ultimately, he is calling it a career. And Trey Harris signs his rookie deal. There was a lot of contention about the second-round players not signing their deals, wanting guaranteed money. But it seems like those dominoes have been falling heading into the weekend. Now, I don't want to sound ignorant, but this is a good thing for Trey Harris, particularly because Mike Williams, to me, was going to be that reliable piece for Justin Herbert, that they brought in a veteran presence to be able to help the wide receivers and give Justin Herbert a familiar target to be able to throw to. But now that he's, more or less out of the way, Trey Harris has, or let me get your perspective first. Do you believe that this is a boost for Trey Harris's fantasy stock, whether it's a dynasty or redraft leagues?
Yeah, I do. I hesitate to say how much, only because I had heard that the Chargers were a little bit concerned about whether or not he could hold down a full-time role doing what Mike Williams could do. But now that Mike Williams is out of the way, the Chargers are basically like, this is baptism by fire. You're going to have to do it. So there's rumors that Quinshon Judkins, they're still not really super excited about what Johnston's doing. So it's going to fall on Trey Harris. And I think he's going to get the opportunity. I think his ADP is going to rise a little bit with the news. But the price tag is still very palatable. You can still get him, in an auction for a couple bucks or in a snake draft pretty late. So I think it does matter that the runway is open now for Trey Harris to take off.
Yeah, I was feeling the same way. Trey Harris was one of my favorite wide receivers to look at post-draft, especially post-draft now that he landed with the Chargers. I kind of felt like he was going to be duking it out with Quinshon Judkins for that wide receiver 3 role with, Ladd McConkey being a staple and Mike Williams being that, like I said, veteran piece that Justin Herbert can rely on. But with him out the way and retired, that just leaves Ladd, Quinshon Judkins, and, Trey Harris to pick up the slack. And Quinshon Judkins, I know it's still early because training camp hasn't started. The rookies have already been back, but Quinshon Judkins is already dropping balls again, man. And it's it's going to be a running joke throughout training camp unless he can tighten that up.
Yeah, it's frustrating because I think the guy has the talent, but there are certain things that he struggled with, and he continues to struggle with them. So I don't know what his future is like. I've got him on my one of my dynasty teams, and just trying to decide what to do with him is difficult because he shows the promise, and then he turns around and does the things that he's been doing. So I can't tell you what's going to happen with Quinshon Judkins. That is a weird situation.
Yeah, basket case, man. All right. Colts quarterback Anthony Richardson. His shoulder was an issue earlier on the minicamp OTA situation, but now he's resumed throwing. ESPN Stephen Holder reports that Richardson was staying in Miami with his personal trainers and throwing the ball with velocity. Now we're going to get into a little sneak peek. He's on our headline situation, so our headline segment. So I don't want to get too far deep into that. But what I will ask you is, what are your vibes for Anthony Richardson, without giving too much away?
Yeah, I just can't get on board. The guy struggles so much with accuracy. He struggled in college with accuracy. It's just a problem that I'm sure he's working on, but I think it's going to continue to dog him, unfortunately.
Yeah. I'll just leave it at that. We'll get into that a little more in the show. Now, Jordan Addison's agent, Tim Younger, announced that Addison has pleaded no contest to a lesser to include let me say this right, a lesser situation involving his DUI situation that happened in 2024. Now, it goes on to say that Addison's guilty plea is an informal term known as wet reckless. And according to Cornell Law School, wet reckless varies state to state and is used when an individual is charged with a DUI offense and pleads down to a reckless driving offense. Now, can you put that in layman's terms for our average fantasy football, even me, because I'm just paraphrasing. So give me the gist.
Yeah, no problem. Wet reckless is just a term. It's sort of like a slang term if law has slang terms, but there actually is a provision in the California law. I just did this the other night, and it's basically a way for the prosecutor to offer a deal that is not pleading guilty to a DUI, but it's also not reducing it so far that it takes alcohol out of the equation. So that's really what it means. What it means is, hey, we're giving you a deal. You're not pleading to the DUI, but we are going to make you acknowledge that alcohol was involved. And so that's the wet part. Because in California, where Addison took this deal, they also have what's called a dry reckless, which means we've reduced the charge and we're acknowledging alcohol wasn't involved or that you weren't impaired. And in this case, what I said all along was this case is difficult for both sides because Addison really needs to take a deal that's not alcohol related. And the prosecutors just got bad facts because he's passed out on a roadway and like in the roadway. It's not like he pulled over and passed out. He's passed out on the road, like holding up traffic. And that's really hard for a prosecutor to want to give a deal to somebody like that. So we had a really difficult situation. Like Addison can't take any kind of deal that's not involved, that involves alcohol. The prosecutor doesn't want to give a deal like that. So I assume they'd come right to the brink of trial, but that it would get settled because neither party really wanted to go forward with the trial. And that's exactly what happened. He ends up taking the deal for the wet reckless. And unfortunately for him, that's going to trigger the personal conduct policy on substances of abuse. There's a mandatory 3-game trigger that's in the policy that says if you plead guilty or are found guilty of a violation involving alcohol, that 3 games is mandatory. Now, I think that there's some wiggle room there, but bottom line is it triggers that policy, and he pled no contest, but that doesn't matter. The statutes in the NFL's policy is pretty clear. No contest is covered. That doesn't shield you from liability for the policy.
Okay, because that was definitely my follow-up question, because Jordan Addison is one of the key pieces for the Vikings offense. J.J. McCarthy is going to be relying on him and Justin Jefferson at the wide receiver position. But now with Jordan Addison more than likely seeing that 3-game suspension, fantasy managers might want to pivot to a better option, heading into their drafts. And we'll wrap up our news segment with this last bit of news. Well, actually, 2 more pieces. I didn't get to put this in here, but Chargers placed Najee Harris on active non-football injury list. He was involved in a fireworks incident. He ended up with a superficial eye injury, but he's expected to be ready for the regular season. They haven't specified how much time he's going to miss to start camp, but I'll leave it at that because he's also in our headline situation, our headline segment.
All right, we'll hit it later.
Yeah, and finally, the Quinshon Judkins situation. Being the case, there's a lot of particulars with this one. This is probably more detailed than than Rashee Rice's or Jordan Addison's. Can you give us a quick synopsis of what's going on with that and what a possible outcome could be?
Yeah, this is a tough one. So he's arrested on July 12th on suspicion of domestic violence. It's called battery with a domestic violence enhancement down in Florida. That's Broward County, Florida. The interesting thing about the case is he's arrested on July 12th. The victim actually called the police that day for an incident from July 7th. So reportedly, according to the police report, she flies in to hang out with him for a few days, And on the way home from the airport, he starts confronting her about some text messages, about some things that he says, what's going on with this and that. And she's trying to explain herself. He allegedly punches her in the jaw with a closed fist. They have an argument. They get out of the car. Then they get back in the car, and she says that she gets back in the back seat because she's scared of him. He hits her 2 more times, I believe in the shoulder and the leg. And then she says after the whole incident, she didn't want to call the police because she felt like, hey, I'm going to ruin his career, and I'm gonna, he's got this new NFL career starting. I don't want to ruin that for him. Well, 5 days later, she calls and reports it because she says that friends and family said, hey, you need to report this. This is important enough. You've got to say something. The thing is, she was smart enough that she took pictures of the alleged, of the damage allegedly caused by Judkins. So she got pictures of bruising in the areas that she described. So that was persuasive enough for the officer to file charges. Now, it's only a first-degree misdemeanor. When I say only, it still carries up to a $1,000 fine and 1 year in jail. But I say only because it's not a felony, so that's helpful. But again, we're talking about the personal conduct policy here. And when I said that stuff didn't really apply to Rice, it does apply to Judkins. And if he's found guilty of a violent charge, that's a 6-game baseline suspension. We're ahead of ourselves a little bit because I don't know if he's going to be found guilty or not. She says that she wants to go forward in the report, but I'll tell you from experience, a lot of times victims will say they want to go forward at the time of the incident, and they really do mean it. But it's a different thing to feel like I want to come to court and have to confront this guy and have to go through all the court proceedings. So it's very possible still that at some point she decides she doesn't want to cooperate, and the case either gets settled or it gets thrown out completely. So that all of that's on the table. So it's really difficult to say at this point whether he's going to be suspended or not, because this could go away or he could be convicted and do 6 to 8 game suspension. There's a huge range here. Unfortunately, we can't dial that in yet until we really know what she wants to do with the case.
All right. Drew, thank you for your insight on these legal matters involving these NFL players. Fantasy managers are definitely trying to get themselves prepared, and we always try to help them out during our news segment, and you've provided all that and more during our news segment. So I appreciate that, man.
You bet.
But now we're going to get into our main segment, NFL training camp headlines to watch so you can get ready for your fantasy league.
And now for our feature presentation.
Okay, so these headlines have been rolling around in my head for like the past couple of days as I was getting ready to do this episode. So I have about maybe 4 or 5 headlines that I think are pertinent as we get ready to get ready for redraft season, which is just a few more weeks away. I know some people have been doing best ball. Some people have been doing the Scott Fish Bowl has already gotten started, and those drafts are underway. Slow draft is a major burn, by the way. I still getting used to that. But in fact, are you in the Scott Fish Bowl this year?
Yeah, we're still in the 11th round. I think my league is slow.
Okay, I think we're around 15. Last time I peeked in before I made my last move. So it's just like it was slow. Like when we got to like around 6, 7, it started to slow down a bit. Now it's starting to pick up because we were almost finished.
Yeah. Ours is a tortuous, slow pace, but hey, we'll get there.
All right. So as far as the headlines, I know I have a few, but were there any headlines that stood out to you that you think that fantasy managers need to be aware of before or heading into training camp to watch these particular situations?
Well, I wouldn't call it a headline as much as I'd say, though, I'm extremely interested in what's going on in the Chiefs' backfield because that's something that I think that fantasy managers can find some value there if we see that Isaiah Pacheco's back. So I'm really watching his snaps in Chiefs camp, and I want to see how the rookie comes along because a lot of people have rookie fever with Rashard Smith, the 7th rounder, and they think he's going to step into a Jerick McKinnon role or something. I sort of doubt that. I think that they kept the veterans around because they want to run the veterans out there. So I'm paying attention to who's going to make the team. Is it Elijah Mitchell or Kareem Hunt? I don't think they want to keep both of them, although maybe they do. I don't know. But, Pacheco had the run of the backfield a couple years ago, and then last year he comes in very highly drafted and gets hurt, and then when he comes back he didn't look like himself. So I really want to know if he's himself, who they cut from that backfield, and who they're talking about getting the majority of the carries. Because when they used Pacheco, they threw him the ball 2, 3, 4 times a game for those in PPR leagues, and he was their goal line back. So I want to see if Pacheco's back. His price is really cheap, and if he is, I'm looking forward to snapping up a lot of Isaiah Pacheco.
Yeah, that's a good one. That Chiefs backfield can pay dividends when they get Isaiah Pacheco the ball. I wanted to see him more involved in the passing game because I feel like he's really dangerous, especially with his kind of running style. He just bullies guys while he's out there. But him being more involved in the passing game is definitely would pay dividends if they do that. But you're right. Who's going to be cut from that backfield? That's definitely a good one. I got one. I really want to see how the backfield for Miami shakes out. You have Jalen Wright, the holdover from last year. You have Alexander Mattison, who was picked up during free agency. You have a late round draft pick, 6th round, in Ollie Gordon II. And they're looking for somebody to be a running mate for Devon Achane. I love Devon Achane. I actually got put on to him by one of my followers when he was coming into the draft. And, you know, he was a little on the small side, like 5'9", he was like 196 coming into the draft. And I'm a big running back lover, like 5'11", 6 foot, 200 something pounds, bruiser type that can catch out of the backfield. I'm locked in on those guys. But when my follower put me on to Devon Achane, I was like, you know, maybe this will work out. They don't really have anybody else. And the report started swirling about, you know, Achane being used in tandem with whoever they had leading. And we got to see that come to fruition with Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert. And that role behind Devon Achane has shown to be prevalent for fantasy football because we saw how Raheem Mostert got off 21 total touchdowns, over 1,000 yards, 17.8 fantasy points per game. There's a role behind Devon Achane, but one of those guys have to come up and get that role. And if I had my way, it would be Ollie Gordon. When you talk about rookie fever, that's where it is right there. Ollie Gordon looks like he fits that role with his size. He's like 6'1", 220 plus pounds. He had a great year in 2023, over 1,700 yards rushing, 6.1 yards per attempt. Like he was getting busy. And if you pair him in those short yardage situations while being versatile enough to catch out of the backfield, and you already have what Devon Achane could do, I like that. I like that dynamic. But it's going to be a fight because Jalen Wright isn't going anywhere, and Alexander Mattison is still hanging around. And I liked him with Minnesota, but when he had his chance to, you know, get that role after they moved on from Dalvin Cook, he just didn't live up to snuff, and he kind of bounced around a little bit after that. Like, what do you think of that situation? Is there a guy that you're planting your flag on out of that backfield, or are you like avoiding the Miami Dolphins backfield altogether?
Well, my main issue with the Dolphins in general, not just the backfield, is I think there's a non-zero chance they blow this thing up at some point during the season if they're not looking very good. Because Tua, as we know, can get hurt. I think it's very possible if they start the season, 3-5 or 2-6 or something like that, they could just get rid of Mike McDaniel altogether. And one of the reasons that Devon Achane was so productive when he had Tua in there was the PPR value. The targets, they were just absolutely peppering him with targets. Excuse me. And so I worry about that. I worry about just the whole offense and them switching coaching staffs and like, what if McDaniel's still doing the same thing with Achane and he's awesome for 6 weeks and they're 1-5 and then McDaniel gets fired and Achane goes back to just being a guy who gets 3 or 4 targets a game. That worries me. But I will say that with the loss of Jonnu Smith, I like Achane as a fantasy asset. I'm not sure I'm going to like him more than somebody in my draft room. Behind him, you mentioned Alexander Mattison, and it's maddening for me, but I don't think the guy's very good, okay? Let me just say that. I'll just be plain spoken. I don't think he's very good, but there's something that he's doing that the coaching staffs like, and they liked him enough in Las Vegas last year to give him enough run to keep him on the field in the better part of a timeshare. and then the Dolphins like him enough to say, hey, we're going to bring him in. So I don't know what it is. If it's his pass pro, I'm not, up on Madison's game enough to know. But they like him for some reason. Jalen Wright, they're going to give him a chance to get the job done. I don't know if he can do it or not, because when they started to give him some reps, it seemed like he was pretty inefficient with his touches. However, I think that comes with time, and I think you can get better, and I think they want him to have that secondary role. So I don't know exactly what they envision behind Achane. I can't say. I'm going to be watching in training camp because I really just don't know what to do with the backfield behind Achane.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the backfields that I keep my eyes glued to see what's going on, because I have Devon Achane in a couple of dynasty leagues, so I'm cool with that part. I just want to see who comes out of that secondary role, because like I said, there's potential there. We've already caught a glimpse of it with Raheem Mostert. If we can get something else, I like having options. Like, even if you miss on Devon Achane or somebody else drafts him ahead, you always want to have an option in your back pocket to be able to help you out. Now, another headline that's caught my attention, this is more closer to home. Dallas Cowboys. Who's going to be the running back for that backfield? Kind of like a reset button's been hit in Dallas. They don't have Rico Dowdle anymore. He moved on to the Carolina Panthers. They whiffed on getting Derrick Henry when he was looking for a phone call. So now they have Javonte Williams, Miles Sanders, Jaden Blue, who they drafted in the 5th round, and Phil Maffa, who was a 7th round pick. Their backfield is in flux, but there's fantasy potential with what they've added on the coaching staff. You had Clayton Adams coming over from Arizona. You have Brian Schottenheimer, whose offensive schemes have worked for running backs in the past when he was with Seattle. So that running back one, or that committee that they're looking to incorporate into that offense, it seems like a lot of teams are going to that committee style 1-2 running backs because, the Detroit Lions made it look cool with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. So there could be potentially 2 guys to look at, but right now, whoever's going to be that running back one is going to be, for less of a better phrase, the star of the show. But who is it going to be? And all right, I'll ask you, who do you think that it could be coming out as their RB1? And what do you think their potential is?
Well, I think it's going to be Javonte Williams, or at least he's going to get the chance to do it. Whether or not he holds on to that, who knows? But I find it interesting that they didn't want any part of Rico Dowdle, that they let him walk, because in my mind, he looked better than Javonte Williams or Miles Sanders last year. So I'm not sure why the Cowboys thought that was the answer. However, I come back to the same thing, that when coaching staff see something, they're going to run with it. They obviously saw something in Javonte Williams that made them say, hey, this guy can carry the ball for us. Now, I don't love Miles Sanders, but I also think the hate on Miles Sanders has gotten a little bit out of control. He's just been in some poor situations. He's not been as good as everyone thought he was going to be, but he's still a pro. I think it's going to come down to those two, and it's probably going to be like some sort of 60-40, 65-35 thing. But I do think Javonte Williams will get the chance to run with it. As far as Jaden Blue goes, there were some weird reports come out today.
I was going to ask you about that too.
Yeah, the coaching staff, thinks that he might be a bit lazy. I don't know. I think that stuff's weird because apparently the guy who said it hasn't worked for the team in a long time. Now maybe he still has some contacts and he's hearing some things. I don't like to hear that kind of slander of a guy, especially a young guy who's trying to make it in the league. I don't love that stuff. But then again, we have to pay attention to it because most of the time, this time of year, the coaching staff, the coach speak is all glowing and positive. He's learning, he's young, he's picking up the offense, that kind of thing. They don't say, this guy's lazy. So if that's true, that's really bad form. He's a 5th rounder. 5th rounders are not guaranteed a roster spot. So there's been a lot of Jaden Blue love out there for his pass catching ability and his explosive potential. And I think we ought to put the brakes on the Jaden Blue stuff until we know more. I still think these 2 pros, Williams and Sanders, are going to be the ones who get a chance to carry the load.
Yeah, and speaking about that news, I think he heard about it because he responded to it on Twitter. He said, they going to film me soon, real soon. Production quiets all that noise. So he's aware that they're talking, somebody's talking down on him. Now, I'll keep this short because I've spoken about this already, but I kind of want Ryan Schottenheimer to go in the younger direction. Like Javonte Williams is more than likely, like you said, going to be the running back one. They've already had murmurs going around that he would probably get the running back one heading into training camp. But I feel like if you can give the young guys the tandem attack of Phil Maffa and Jaden Blue as your 1-2 punch, you might actually have something better and more long-term because remember, Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders are only on 1-year deals. So are you willing to pay Javonte Williams maybe something close to or nearer market value or give him $10 million or whatever a year when you have two young guys who profile or could potentially profile to be better than Javonte Williams or what he's been able to show so far? What I really want the Cowboys to consider, because like I said, there have already been murmurs about Javonte Williams coming in and being a running back one heading into training camp. But you have two younger guys in Phil Maffa and Jaden Blue who could be your long-term options. And if they're really going to go to this tandem attack by using two running backs, wouldn't you want to see what those two young guys can do? Maffa's already bigger. He's probably the biggest running back out of the group at 6'1". He's over 200-something pounds compared to Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders. And both of those guys are on 1-year deals. So it does make more sense to kind of see what you have in your future as opposed to just using Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders. And honestly, I don't see the Cowboys keeping 4 running backs because, like I said, you already have Sanders and Williams on 1-year deals. You still have Deuce Vaughn lurking in the background somewhere. You have Hunter Lemke, who's a fullback, but I'm not too crazy about him. But somebody's getting cut. One of those guys are getting cut. And if I have the choice, I'm probably going to move on from Miles Sanders. Because Javonte Williams is a better pass catcher. Phil Maffa could be a better pass catcher. And Jaden Blue is a receiver turned running back. So they all have, better aspects out of the backfield as far as catching the ball over Miles Sanders, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But we'll see how that shakes out.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the intervening period while you were talking about the backfield, literally just got a message on the Football Guys Base Camp. Some people talking about the Jaden Blue news. Sounds to me like there were whispers of this stuff down and when he was at Texas. So maybe that was an intentional leak to get him motivated. I don't know. I think you make a great point about moving into a situation where you use the young running backs. That's what I would do. The problem is the Cowboys haven't shown a lot of logic to some of their moves in the last couple of years.
Understatement.
So I'm worried that they don't think that way and that an assumption of rational coaching. I don't know who it was that coined this phrase. It might have been Sigmund Bloom here with Football Guys. But point being, assumption of rational coaching is a dangerous thing because sometimes they don't do things that are rational. And I don't know what to think about these young guys. That's personally what I would do. I agree with you. Having said that, I don't know if that's going to happen.
We'll see. But as far as fantasy goes, with the value that you're getting from either Javonte Williams or the other two guys, they're going later on in the draft, more likely beyond the 5th round. So whatever running back comes out of the scuffle as the top dog, you could see a significant value for one of those running backs.
It doesn't cost you anything. I might as well. I'll go grab both of them near the end of the draft. The draft capital is so low. I'll take a chance.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of draft capital, Najee Harris versus Amarian Hampton. Now, this is one of my favorites because I'll let you know from the rip. I'm a Amarian Hampton guy. He's already going to be the number 2 behind Ashton Genty in rookie drafts. At least in my opinion, he should be. Immensely talented. There was a point where people were considering him to be the RB1 over Ashton Genty during the draft process. And now he lands with the Chargers in one of the best rushing schemes in the NFL. And Najee Harris is his competition. And he's hurt. We don't know when Najee Harris is going to come back and be ready for training camp, if he's going to be ready for training camp at all. And it looks like, and it's still early, but Amarian Hampton has a golden opportunity to lock down that RB1 spot and kind of leave Najee Harris in the dust. When you compare what Amarian Hampton has done at the college level and what Najee Harris has done in the NFL so far, it's not really even splitting hairs at this point.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. I was on Najee Harris early in the offseason and saying, hey, the Chargers went out. They got their guy. They got a guy who, number one, stays on the field, doesn't get hurt, which is ironic considering what we're doing now. But then on top of that, just a guy that they know is reliable, that is a pro, that can read their system well and play straightforward and get the ball up the field. So the Chargers are putting out pretty strong signals that they didn't like how their running game faltered at the end of last year. They didn't like that Dobbins fell off a cliff. They had injuries to the offensive line. So they go out, they get a road grader, Mekhi Becton, and then they sign Harris. They draft Hampton. They're making clear signals they want to run the football this year, and they didn't like throwing it the second half of the season when they had to because their running game went in the tank. So they don't want that to happen again. I think they're going to use both guys. And I've been on record as saying Najee Harris is not going away. I don't think that necessarily that means I want to have him for fantasy because I believe in the second half of the season that Hampton's going to take over the backfield and Harris will be more of a complimentary 30% touches, 35% touches, something like that. The problem with Hampton at this point is he's already coming off the board as RB16 in drafts. That means that as we get into casual territory in August, when people are starting to do their drafts, I'm afraid that's going to go up even higher. I don't really want to push him up into the Breece Hall, Chase Brown territory. I just had this conversation with JJ Zachariason on my show about what do we do with Hampton because he's already kind of at the ceiling where we want to draft him. I love Hampton, but a thing about the Chargers offense that JJ pointed out, and that I went and looked into it. Sure enough, Greg Roman just doesn't throw the ball to his backs very much. He's one of those who's going to be in the bottom third of the league in targets to running backs. That really hurts you in a PPR format. So, and especially if you're dividing up some of those targets. So, I'm fine with Hampton where he's at. I really would like to take him as RB18, RB20-ish area. But right now he's RB16, and I'm afraid that's going to go up. He's going to end up being 14 or 15. I just don't like that value. Having said that, I still am bullish on Hampton in LA, and I think that he's one of those guys that, this Harris thing is weird. Okay, I think there's more going on. I don't think that's a novel opinion. Most people do. When you say, "Oh, he'll be ready for the start of the season," but it's a superficial injury, like you didn't just get a scratch to your eye. No, ready in 6 weeks. It's no big deal. Like 6 weeks is a long period of time for the season to say he's going to be ready for the season. So something weird's happening there with Harris. And what I'm worried about for Harris's sake, but also for Hampton's ADP, is that he gets out on the field in training camp and the coaches go, whoa, look at this guy. This guy's awesome. What the hell are we doing with this plodder, this 60-year guy who plods around and just falls forward for 3.5 yards per carry? And then he gets in let's say he gets in a preseason game. He just rips off 2 big runs and a couple touchdowns. All of a sudden, Najee Harris is a distant memory, and also the RB16 ADP is a distant memory.
Oh, yeah.
It's like RB12. I don't really want any part of that, but that's a serious consideration. If Harris doesn't get back on the field, we could see, Hampton go ballistic before we can ever get a read on the situation.
So I like the way you broke that down because I was definitely on the bullish side too for Amari Hampton. But when you put it like that, it's like, man, he shows out. His ADP is going to go through the roof if it hasn't already. Like if people aren't aware of who he is after the preseason games, they will know who he is, and that ADP is going to shoot. Like Ashton Genty's still going like late in the first round, early in the second, and he hasn't touched the field yet. So yeah, I'm right there with you. Here's one. We're gonna wrap this episode up with, or we're gonna wrap this segment up, and then I'll get you right with the would you rather. My last one, we can talk quickly about this. Las Vegas Raiders, Deontay Thornton Jr. Now, he's more one of my favorite sleepers. He got a lot of praise during the OTAs and minicamp for the Raiders. Big guy, 6'5", 216 pounds, I believe. Runs a 4.3, tore up the combine with his speed. And the Raiders are in a shuffle of sorts because they've added more weapons. They do have Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers still there, but they needed more wide receiver help, and they didn't have that last season. They add a big target with Geno Smith to target, and people have been calling him like baby DK Metcalf or Metcalf light or stuff like that. But it's just like the potential is there, or at least I feel like the potential is there because he was even playing over in the first team over second round pick Jack Beck during OTAs and minicamp. If he can continue that kind of pacing and really gel with Geno Smith and show that he belongs on the field in 2 or 3 wide receiver sets, we could have a really good sleeper on our hands with Dante Thornton if he can do that, because they don't have a lot of targets. And I think conversely, now that they've added Jack Beck, they've added Thornton, if he can lock down one of those roles, and you have Jacoby Myers and Ashton Jeanty who can catch out of the backfield. The minus to this is that I think Brock Bowers is going to suffer because people are going to draft him expecting him to put out the same production that he had in his rookie season without considering the fact that they didn't have a bunch of pass catching options and the run game was bad. So they're with Chip Kelly and Pete Carroll there, I think they're going to try and make it a more balanced offense. That's going to hurt Brock Bowers' potential because he's being drafted like the tight end 1 or 2. It's like a tug of war between him and George Kittle. But back to Thornton, he locks down one of those wide receiver 2 sets or wide receiver 2 roles behind Jacoby Myers. We could have a really good sleeper on our hands.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head as far as his opportunity here, because the wide receiver room might be one of the worst in the league. Jacoby Myers as your wide receiver 1. I like Jacoby Myers, but as your wide receiver 1, I'm not sure that's what you want.
Yeah.
He's a complementary piece, and he's also a guy that likes to work out of the slot. Now, he can do a lot of things, but this wide receiver room is atrocious. I mean, on the other side of Myers, you've got Trey Tucker, and I was on Trey Tucker in my deep leagues last year because he was the cardio king. He was on the field all the time, and they tried to throw him the ball, and it just never worked. He was just bad last year, and I'm not sure what they saw where they thought to themselves, hey, we're good with Trey Tucker. I don't get that. And so I know they went out and they drafted 2 guys, and that's what we're talking about. So the problem is the wide receiver room is terrible, but therein lies the opportunity. So you hit the nail on the head already. I mean, their wide receiver 2 is Brock Bowers. So that's really what it comes down to. But you also hit the nail on the head when you said this is going to be a more balanced offense. They threw the ball a lot more last year than most people realize, and I think they're going to be run heavy. That's what Pete Carroll likes to do. If he has his way, they will run the ball to set up play action passing and let Geno Smith have a little bit of an easier time there with Jeanty. So I don't know what we're going to see as far as volume for these rookies. And that would be my main concern, because the opportunity is certainly there for Thornton. They're talking him up like he could be a thing. I'm willing to buy it late in drafts.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to spend draft capital on it, but I'm willing to take him as one of my backer roster guys because, again, the opportunity is there. That is just a horrendous wide receiver room.
Yeah, when you put it like that, it is. A lot of new guys, not a lot of valuable talent up front, even with Jacoby Myers being some sort of name. But yeah, they're definitely in the revamp stages. But that'll do it for our NFL training camp headlines segment. Now let's get you over to Would You Rather, our quarterback edition. I got 2 guys I just want to quickly touch on, and then we'll wrap up the episode.
Which would you rather be?
Okay, so would you rather? I'm going to make this short and sweet for you because it's time to wrap it up. But Baker Mayfield has been heavily talked about this offseason. He's being drafted as a top 10 fantasy quarterback. Had a great season last year with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But here's my would you rather. Would you rather Baker Mayfield or Jared Goff?
That's easy for me. It's Baker Mayfield. Jared Goff had an unsustainable touchdown rate last year. I think he threw 6.9% touchdown rate last year. I'm pulling it off the top of my head, but he's not going to do that again. I think the Lions' pass offense is due to pull back a little bit because they had to throw the ball last year because the defense had so many injuries. So I think the defense is actually better than people realize. I think that if they stay healthy, then they don't have to throw as much. And frankly, they don't want to throw that much. Dan Campbell wants to run the ball. And, obviously I'm bearing the lead here. They lose Ben Johnson. So I just think there's too many moving parts. There's too many things in flux. They have talent there in Detroit, but I think they're going to pull back a little bit. Baker Mayfield, now I talked about touchdown rates. Baker Mayfield had an unsustainable touchdown rate too, 7.2%. That's huge. He's more around 4.95% for his career. So I understand he's going to pull back also. However, if he pulls back to 5% with the number of attempts he had last year, that's still 30 touchdowns. And he had some production on the ground that we like to see, about 300 yards rushing, a couple touchdowns on the ground. I still think he can do that again. So I think that little touchdown upside there with the rushing and the rushing ability, I still think the guy can get to 30 total touchdowns between rushing and passing. And that means that I still believe that Baker's going to be a good fantasy asset. I'm not sure he's where I want him to be drafted. I want him to be a little bit lower to draft him to really have a lot of him, but I still think he's going to be a good fantasy asset.
Okay, I like that breakdown. Now, Baker Mayfield or Trevor Lawrence?
I'm going Baker again. Now, I've been on record as saying I'm very bullish on Trevor Lawrence because he gets an offensive coach probably for the first time in his career. He's really going to give him some tools to work with. And one of the things that I've heard on the criticism of Lawrence, which I don't know because I'm not a film guy, but I've heard he's just not great with his progressions, that when he sees something he doesn't like, he kind of gets off of it and throws the ball away or checks it down. And I'm hoping that Liam Cohen can help with that. But on top of that, when you draft a wide receiver number 2 overall, you're really thinking that guy's going to produce for you.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got 2 alpha targets, Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter. He's got an offensive coach. I'm bullish on Lawrence, but I'm still taking Baker, chiefly because I just believe that Baker's better than people think he is. And so I'm not sold that Lawrence is still a great NFL quarterback. I think he might be good. He might just be an average starter, in which case I absolutely want Baker.
Okay. And here, this one should be a little bit harder. Baker Mayfield or Justin Herbert?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I'm going to go back to my analysis with the Chargers before. I think they're signaling that they want to run the ball. The times that Herbert was good near the end of the year or through the middle of the season, their running game fell off a cliff, and they were forced to throw. I don't think that's what they want to do. I don't think they want their identity to be about passing the football. So I don't know that the volume's going to be there. And I also believe that the Chargers' defense is a decent enough defense that they can try to run the football if they want. I'm concerned about the Bucs' defense, and that's part of the reason I like Baker in this game here, because I think that defense is going to be pretty bad. Scott Pianowski from Yahoo called it carnival games. I love that. Games where you're just hitting that scoreboard over and over, and it's going ding, 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 ding. I think that's what's going to happen with the Bucs. Their defense is terrible. I think Baker's just going to have to throw the ball, air it out a lot to be in games. So I'll take Baker again.
Oh man, Baker 3 for 3. Okay.
Yeah, that surprised me too, man. Hey.
Drew, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate your insights, both legally and for fantasy football, man. It was great to have you on. Please plug yourself one more time before we wrap the show up and let them know where they can find you and your podcast.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. You can find me on Twitter at Drew Davenport FF. You can find me at the Fantasy Football Lawyer on TikTok and Patreon. And then, of course, my show, that's my baby, the Auction Brief Podcast. It's going on right now. It's a draft season show. I do a couple episodes through the year, but mostly it's a draft season show. I drop about 12 episodes every summer where I talk about auction theory, but I also have on some big guests. This summer we've had Rich Rebar and J.J. Zacharyson and Marcus Grant. And so it's been a good summer already, and we're cranking out 4 or 5 more before we're done. So thank you again for having me.
Oh, no problem, man. Thank you again for agreeing to come on. And that'll do it for this episode. So, again, make sure that you're locked into the Fantasy's Finest across all social media platforms at FF's Finest. And you can follow the podcast on your favorite podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and of course on our YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, Drew, thank you for coming on and talking some fantasy football with us, and we will catch you in our next episode. Until then, you guys take it easy. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy's Finest podcast. Be sure to join the community on Facebook and follow us on Twitter too at the Fantasy's Finest. See you next episode.